Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Be Like Christ. Today, actually last time we took a parenthesis from our study of Matthew, and this time I want to continue that parenthesis, actually. But I think this parenthesis will really help us to get a better understanding of the entire Gospel of Matthew. And it'll help us to look back in time a little bit into that intertestamental period, the time between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and kind of fill in a little bit of some of the gaps. So I want to do a special study today on Herod the Great, and I just want to give you a few facts about his life that will help you to understand who he is and why he would want to do something like what he's about to do in the second half of chapter 2 in killing all of the infants to try to destroy Jesus, who is this claimed king of the Jews. So let's take a look at Herod the Great. Herod the Great reigned for 34 years, and one of the primary sources that we have about the life of Herod the Great is Josephus. And Josephus actually wrote a biography on Herod the Great, so we have some very good details about his life. Herod was not a Jew. He was a half-Jew at best. His father was from Idumea, which is south of Judah, and his mother was from Petra. Petra is always symbolized by that temple that is carved out of solid rock. I think it's in the Indiana Jones movies. That's where they find the Holy Grail. But that's actually a real place, and it's from Petra, and Herod's mother was from there. Herod came to power kind of unexpectedly. In 63 BC, the Romans overthrew the Hasmonean dynasty, and the Hasmonean dynasty is associated with the Maccabees. If you're familiar with intertestamental period, or just if you're familiar with the apocryphal books or intertestamental period in general, then you'll know about the Maccabees. So they get overthrown in 63 BC by the Romans, and Herod's father is seen, he encourages them to try to cooperate with the Romans. And because he holds that stance, the Romans give him great reward monetarily and in power. And through an alliance with Mark Antony, who was Herod's father's friend, Herod the Great convinces the Roman Senate that making him king of the Jews will solve all their problems, because the Romans really just wanted peace in Judea. And so Herod says, if you make me the king, I'll give you peace. You won't have anything else to worry about. And so he's made king in 40 BC, and he swears his allegiance to the Roman Empire by sacrificing to the pagan gods with Mark Antony and Octavian. And just a little side note here, Cleopatra doesn't show up anywhere in biblical history, but history actually tells us that Herod the Great and Cleopatra had some dealings with each other. So, Herod returns to the Promised Land, and he spends 3 years overthrowing another Hasmonean rebellion. And that Hasmonean rebellion was led by a man who was known as the King of the Jews. Excuse me. So he overthrows that, takes him 3 years, and then Herod proceeds to kill dozens of people in a quest to secure his kingdom from his rivals. And this was something that we would see. This is something we'll see over and over and over again in the life of Herod. He is power hungry, and he is paranoid with the security of his kingdom. Then, in a political move, and in what seems to be a move motivated by genuine love and infatuation, he marries a Hasmonean princess whose name is Maritima, and he appoints her brother as the high priest in Jerusalem. And this is a little bit, this plays into the gospel stories, because we wonder how the priesthood becomes so corrupt. How can it be that the leader of the leader of the Jews under the Mosaic law, the high priest, this mediator between God and the people, how can he become so corrupt that he was willing to kill the Christ? Well, this is how. Because the high priesthood had become a political position for appointment. It was a pawn of the state. And so Aristobulus, Mariami's brother, is given this position, and he's only 17 years old when he receives this position. But what happens is that he actually becomes very, very popular with the people because he's from that Hasmonean line, that Jewish line, and Herod's not. And so Herod then begins to see him as a threat to his kingdom and his power, and he actually drowns, or has Aristobulus drown in his swimming pool near Jericho. He then ends up killing Mariami. She does not hold back her contempt for him because he killed her brother, and he accuses Mariami of adultery and has her killed. Whether those accusations were true is certainly debatable, but that's what he does. He has her killed. Following this, he kills her mother and almost all of her living relatives. During his lifetime, he would marry 8 more wives. So he would have a total of 10 marriages. He dissolved one to marry Mariami in the beginning. Herod's greatest accomplishment, at least what he's remembered for the most, 2 things really. Number one is the temple in Jerusalem. He brings the temple to its greatest point. And this is one way that he tries to win over the people of his kingdom, the Jews. And it worked to some extent. And to this day, the temple is the largest religious structure ever built by one man. The Jews were really worried when he said that he was going to renovate the temple because it was their holy place, and they were kind of worried that this was just a tactic to actually destroy the temple altogether. So they demanded that he follow their rules if he wanted to do this, and one of those was that they had to gather all the materials ahead of time, and that actually took Herod 2 years to do. And they demanded that he could not go into the most holy place or the holy place, or his laborers couldn't. And so what Herod did was he actually trained priests in carpentry and metalwork, and those priests would then go into the temple, to the holy places, and they would do the renovations. The temple was covered in white marble, and it was said to have shined in the sun, and it was just said to be a magnificent structure. His second great accomplishment that remained a little bit longer was Caesarea Maritima. And Caesarea Maritima was a city that he built from absolutely nothing on the coast of the Mediterranean. He did this about 20 years before Jesus was born, and one of the reasons it was so significant was because he built it in a place that was not really conducive to the port city that it would become. The geography was wrong. There was really no harbor in this place. And Herod seemed to select that for a reason, and it was to show that he was able to conquer nature in accomplishing what he wanted. And so he actually builds, in a great feat of engineering, a man-made harbor. There's a bunch of thunder outside, if you can hear that. He actually builds a man-made harbor out of a type of concrete that he imports that would actually form and harden underground. And so it was quite an accomplishment as an architect. And it became one of the biggest cities in the Roman Empire. Herod, though, as we mentioned, and we continue on with his life, was obsessed with his power and keeping that. And he had already disposed one king of the Jews. And Herod's biggest threat was going to come in the form of Jesus, who was also said to be the king of the Jews. And so this is why his response is so quick and so evil in Matthew chapter 2. But Mary and Joseph are warned of this by God, and they flee down to Egypt. And after they're gone, Herod has all the boys 2 years and under killed in the area of Bethlehem. And this would come to be known as the slaughter of the innocents. Herod would continue his rampage of evil. He actually would have 2 of his sons killed. He had 12 sons total that Josephus records for us, and 2 of those were Mariami's adult children. And he ends up eliminating them on some phony accusations, and that pretty much totally annihilates the Hasmonean line. Josephus writes that in his old age he became more paranoid, more mad, and he was really struggling with infections and diseases, and this may have been part of what was driving him so insane and messing up his mental faculties. It says that he had a fever, that he was itching all over his body all the time, that he had pain in his colon, he had tumors on his feet, he had inflammation of his abdomen, and he had some kind of putrefaction of his private parts that produced worms. So, kind of rough. Herod was nearing death at this point, and he ordered on his deathbed the execution of his eldest son, who had already put in prison for treason. And he then made a command that nobles in every village and every town in Judea should be thrown into prison. And then when he died, those nobles were to be executed as well. And there were thousands of them. And so his soldiers went around and rounded these people up, and they were prepared to go through with this command. And the reasoning behind this command was Herod said, if these people don't weep for me on the day that I die, they'll weep for the people in their village that they knew that I killed. So not a very nice guy. But mercifully, when Herod did die, this command was ignored and never followed through with. Herod left behind several heirs, and all of them were incapable. And the evidence of that is that 70 years later, the Romans would come in and they would be so sick of the Jewish rebellions that they would just utterly wipe out Jerusalem. The beautiful temple that Herod had spent all this time on and all this money on would be destroyed and never rebuilt. There's only one wall of that temple still standing today, and that would be the legacy that he left. And so just a few facts there to kind of give you a little bit of history and give you a better understanding, get a better grip of Matthew chapter 1 and 2 and what's going on there, and the man who was in power during that time.